Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 84th day of the 108th Legislature First Session. Our chaplain today is Pastor Eric Mosier, Riverview Community Church in Ashland in Senator Bostomann's district. Please rise.
Let's pray. Lord Jesus Christ, your word says in Psalm 118, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Let Israel say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever." Out of my distress I called to the Lord, and the Lord answered me and set me free. The Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me? The Lord is on my side. He is my helper. And I look in triumph on those who hate me. It's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. All nations surround me. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me on every side. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me like bees, and they went out like a fire among thorns. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. I was pushed hard so that I was failing, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Glad songs of salvation are in the tents of the righteous, and the right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord exalts, and the right hand of the Lord does valiantly. I shall not die, but I will live and recount the deeds of the Lord. The Lord has disciplined me severely, but he has not given me over to death. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I might enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. I thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing and is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.
I recognize Senator Merman for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 84th day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Amendments to be printed from Senator Slama to LB 514. Additionally, bills presented to the governor, LBs 683E and 683AE, were presented to the governor on May 24, 2023 at 8:25 a.m. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Senator Bostoman announces some guests under the south balcony. Lee Sapp and Tim Welling from Ashland. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Bosin announces and recognizes the physician of the day, Dr. Marlon Weiss of Lincoln. Please stand and be recognized by the Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, please proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Senator Legislative Bill, Select File Legislative Bill 562A. I have nothing on the bill, Senator.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 562A be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Members, you have heard the motion to advance LB 562A to ENR engrossing. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, nay. It is advanced.
Legislative Bill 705A. Senator, I have nothing on the bill.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 705A be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Members, you have heard the motion to advance LB 705A for ENR engrossing. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, say nay. It is advanced. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, next item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 753, final reading. Senator Hunt would move to recommit the bill to committee. My understanding is Senator Dungan is authorized to open on that motion, Mr. President.
While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign legislative resolutions 165, 173, 177, and 187. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. We find ourselves here on the final reading of LB 753. Senator Hunt had asked me to open up on her motion here to recommit to committee, so I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the issues that I know we've already discussed with regards to the opportunity tax scholarships, and I want to make sure that my colleagues who are here all on final reading here in the room once again have an opportunity to hear some of the concerns and I guess the issues that myself and others have with this bill. I do want to take a second, as I've done on every other step of this process, to thank Senator Linehan for her work on this. That's not just a platitude. I know a lot of times we thank folks on the mic when they've brought a bill and worked really hard on it, but I do know this is very important to Senator Linehan, and in my conversations with her in the Revenue Committee and also on the floor, I do believe, as I've said previously, that she is incredibly genuine with her desire to help children and try to provide as many opportunities as possible. My concerns, however, remain that by providing these tax credits, which is what they are tax credits, these sort of neo-vouchers, as we've called them in the past, we are doing a disservice not just to our children here in Nebraska, but we're doing a disservice to our public schools in Nebraska. So anybody who's listened to me talk about this before knows that I'm born and raised here in Lincoln, but that I spent some time elsewhere. So I lived for a little while down in Kansas, and I also lived for a little while in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that was pronounced to me as I lived in those places and then ultimately moved back to Nebraska was the quality of our public schools here in Nebraska and how exceptional they are. I've had an opportunity to visit schools here in Lincoln, in Omaha, in urban areas, but I've also had a chance to go visit schools and tour schools in western Nebraska, central Nebraska, and across the board. What I've been completely blown away by is the fact that our public schools in this state are not just oftentimes the centerpiece of whatever community they're in, but they are almost always lauded by the community as a whole. And when I was out knocking doors prior to this session and talking to folks across the entire political spectrum, when I talked about the things they liked about their community and the things they liked about their neighborhood, and frankly, the things that made them want to raise a family in Nebraska, consistently the things they were talking about on a regular basis were the quality of schools and the quality of teachers that we have with our public education. And it really does make us stand out. And I'm not just saying that to bolster the schools. I genuinely believe when you look at our data, when you look at our numbers, and when you look at the fact that we have this integrated network of schools and committed teachers who create K through 12 education without having this competition or needing that competition, but still having quality schools, I think it's phenomenal. So my fear and my concern is that based on other states that have implemented programs similar to this, and based on other states that have implemented so-called school choice, when in reality they're diverting public funds to private education, it can do a disservice to the public schools. And we should be doing everything we possibly can to encourage our funding to schools be increased. We have a commitment this year from the governor to increase state aid to public schools, which is something that I know many of us have talked about for a very long time. And I believe that's exactly what we should be doing. State aid to public schools reduces reliance on property taxes. And it also is a long-term ongoing commitment to make our public schools what they can be. But we cannot, at the same time that we are committing money to public schools, then reduce our revenue in such a way that could endanger that, while simultaneously diverting those public funds that would otherwise be going to the general fund and thereby going to public education, and diverting those to the private institutions who would be receiving those scholarships. So we're going to hear, I already see the queue filling up. I know we're going to have a conversation here this morning about this, but I think there's two major components that we need to look at when we're discussing LB 753. And I think both of them present problems. One question is, can we do this? And the other question is, should we do this? And I think on both ends of that, I see issues. And what I mean by that is when you sort of bifurcate the concerns here, the can is, do we have the money long term? Is it constitutional? Is it going to affect our public education funding on other levels? And I think a number of my colleagues are going to talk about those. So there's the logistical problems, there's the monetary problems, there's the legal problems. Can we even do this in the first place? And then on the other side of that is should we be doing this? And that's where you run into issues that colleagues of mine like Senator Frederickson and Senator Hunt have spoken about so eloquently in the past, which is if we are going to be giving public money to private institutions, there should be some barrier or backstop to prevent discrimination. Because what we know is that despite the use of public tax dollars, students are not protected from discrimination under LB 753. We hear a lot in this body about how bullying happens and therefore students need to be moved from one school to another. But what we also know is that in these private institutions, there is no assurance that bullying is not going to continue. And if we're going to be providing this public funding to the private institutions without there being any kind of assurance that there is anti-discrimination policies in place at those schools, it's problematic. On the previous round of debate, we had conversations about what the policies are at these private institutions, and I had an opportunity to pull up a number of private school manuals where I could look at their discrimination policies. And in those discrimination policies across the board, students were not allowed, or there is, first of all, was not an anti-discrimination policy in most of them. And in many of the school handbooks that I found, there were policies in place that, for example, said that students had to wear clothes that conformed with their gender assigned at birth, or they had to make sure their hair was conformed to a certain gender standard. And so in a body where all we've been doing this entire session is talking about LB 574, for valid reasons, it would bear repeating that there's a number of students that if they were to go to these private institutions would oftentimes not have protection from discrimination. So again, what we know is that despite the use of public tax dollars, students are not protected from discrimination under LB 753. The bill explicitly states that this proposal does not grant the state any expanded authority over private schools, and that just because a student qualifies for a tax credit scholarship, it does not mean the private school has to enroll them. No reason would need to be given for declining to admit or expelling a student from a private school. So despite the fact that there's going to be public funding that ultimately is benefiting these private institutions, there's nothing in there to say that the private institutions have to accept students or that they cannot turn a student away for a particular reason. If a student shows up with two dads and then that student gets in trouble, there's nothing in this bill saying that that private institution cannot discriminate against them. And I find that incredibly problematic. So again, this comes down to the can we do it? Do we have the money? Do the logistics work out? Is it constitutional? And should we do it? Is this the best use of our dollars? Is there a backstop in place to protect students from discrimination? And I think those are the two things that we should predominantly be focusing on here today. What we also know is that there's been numerous documented examples of malfeasance in similar circumstances like this one. So in the Arizona Scholarship Tax Credit Program, we saw numerous documented examples of malfeasance, and there's nothing in LB 753 that's going to prevent similar issues from arising in Nebraska. What we know is that nearly 2/3 of scholarship granting organizations that benefited from the program failed to spend 90% of their donations on scholarships, the amount required by the law between 2003 and 2009 in the Arizona program. We know, excuse me, that executives at two of the largest scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs, used the tax credit donations to enrich themselves buying luxury cars, real estate, and funding for outside for-profit business. LB 753 prohibits donors from designating scholarship funds for specific students. Arizona had this component as well, but scholarship granting organizations there worked around that by allowing for donor recommendations. Despite the influx of millions of dollars in scholarship funding, private schools hiked tuition dramatically, maintaining the inaccessibility of a private education for middle and low-income families.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we know that students at private schools received the most scholarship money have remained overwhelmingly white, even during a time when the state's Latinx population boomed. So again, the intent behind 753, I believe here is genuine. I believe the intent is good. But what we have seen in other states and what we have seen in other circumstances where laws like 753 have been enacted is they do not benefit the people they are intended to help. They do enrich the individuals who are ultimately going to be benefiting from the receiving of these monies from the SGO, and we don't see protections against discrimination. I don't believe that this is a fiscally responsible way to use our money, and I believe that the $25 million initially, which ultimately can grow to $100 million for our yearly allocation or appropriation for this fund, could be better used elsewhere. So colleagues, please listen today. I think we're going to have a robust conversation about LB 753, and I would encourage your green vote on the motion to recommit, and I would encourage your red vote on LB 753. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. So this bill has been said to be about school choice. But the mechanism of this bill is not about school choice. The mechanism of this bill does not give choice to parents or students. The choices being made in this bill are being made by donors. This is a donors bill. This is a bill, top to bottom, about how to treat certain kinds of donations. That's all the bill is about. How do we treat certain kinds of charitable donations? That's it. That's the bill. How do we treat certain kinds of charitable donations? Those donations will get a 100% tax credit in this bill. Currently, it's tax deductible, like all other charitable donations. But in this bill, you designate where your taxes go. We're giving one kind of charitable donation precedence over every other kind of charitable donation. So if you're the kind of person who wants to give to studies for pediatric cancer, for human trafficking shelters, for food banks, to your own church, you are, after the passage of this bill, given second-class status for donations in the tax code. If you want to give to pediatric cancer, you will get a tax deduction. If you want to give under this bill to an already existing organization that provides scholarships, you will get 100%, as long as it's not 50% or more of your total tax, you will get 100% back. That means that every previous donor to these organizations in the future gets all their money back. In the past, they said a tax credit or a tax deduction is enough for me to give to this place. I believe in this enough that I'm going to give to this organization. They got a tax deduction. In the future, those same donors get all their money back. But those people who would like to give to food banks or their own church, synagogue, or temple just get a tax deduction. This isn't about anything else. It's very simple. This is about giving one kind of giving, first-class tax status, and giving all other charitable giving a different status. So next year, should we come back and say pediatric cancer, 100%, and also we're going to give 100% to food banks and human trafficking shelters. If you give to any of those organizations, you get 100% of your taxes back. And pretty soon someone will come back for everything. It's like license plates.
1 minute.
Those of you who are on the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee know that you can't say no to a license plate because where's the line? That's why we have so many different license plates. They're all good causes. Every single cause someone would come to us in the future and say, this is a good cause we should give 100% tax credit to, it would be hard pressed for us to say it's not a good cause. But then if we do that, where does it stop? Colleagues, this is a bill about donors' choice. About donors' choice. That's what the bill is about. Who gets to have first-class status for their donations in our tax code. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going, I'll first respond to Senator Dungan. So if tax credits and school choice is so bad, and we have all these stories, evidently, that I don't know what Senator Dungan is referring to, why do 48 states have school choice? 48. North Dakota, Nebraska, the only ones without school choice. So it must be working somewhere. And I think I have colleagues here who will explain some of the differences where there's robust school choice in states like Florida. In Florida, where scores have been going up, versus Nebraska, where scores have been flat and going down. If parents choose a scholarship, they will have a choice to go to a school. And you want to talk about bullying, we know, all of us in this body, especially on the Education Committee, know that bullying is one of the biggest problems we have in public schools. We know that. So let's don't pretend that we don't have children locked in public schools that are getting bullied, that are miserable, whose parents don't have any choice. And one of the first priorities of this bill is to help those parents. It's also to help children who try to opt into another public school and get turned down because they have a disability or an IEP. And we all know on the Education Committee that happens. Now, Senator DeBoer's comments. This is not about wealthy people. I've got the staff trying to figure out how many tax credits we passed since we've been here, since January. I think in 727 yesterday that you all voted aye on, there were no votes I heard last night. There are 5 or 6 new tax credits in that bill. So let's don't pretend we don't like tax credits, guys. If I get a chance to be on the mic again, I'll have a list of the ones we have passed or on final reading this year. And what else do we have for tax credits in Nebraska? We have Imagine Nebraska. That doesn't help kids, I don't think. Well, it might. It creates jobs. I'm not saying Imagine's bad, but it doesn't help poor children attend a school of choice. We have the New Markets and Job and Growth Investment Tax Credit. We have the Rural Development Tax Credit. We reinstated the Nebraska Historic Tax Credit yesterday. We have an Affordable Housing Tax Credit. We have a Nebraska Higher Blend Tax Credit. I think we have a bill this year for an ethanol E15 tax credit. Yesterday's bill, we had a biodiesel tax credit. We have the Nebraska Earned Income Tax Credit, the School Readiness Tax Credit. In the income tax bill, we have tax credits for parents who have children in daycare and for people who work in daycare. So please, let's don't say we're not for tax credits, guys. We have all kinds of tax credits. I'll stop boring you with the list. And no, we don't have a tax credit for cancer donations, but we take Nebraska's taxpayers' money and we, through appropriations, I think last year gave 15 million to pancreatic cancer at UNMC. 15 million. That's taxpayer dollars. We take at good causes. We take all kinds of taxpayer dollars and do good things. 2 years ago in 1107, we committed 300 million to UNMC if they got the next project. That's taxpayer dollars. To compare this is about choice. It's something that every student and child and parent that lives in 40 other states has access to, and we're not letting Nebraskans have it. It's time we get this done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Holcroft, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise in support of LB 753. And I agree with Senator Linehan. This is not about the tax credits. This is about giving families, parents, an opportunity to send their children to a school that is most appropriate to them. And I'd like to talk about a couple schools if I have time. First one that's near and dear to my heart is St. Matthew's in Bellevue. So St. Matthew's is where my wife actually teaches. She teaches 7th and 8th grade math and science there. But the history behind this school is pretty incredible. Back in the 1960s, as Offutt Air Force Base was ramping up and Strategic Air Command headquartered there, they had a lot of Catholic families that came into the area, and the only other parish school in the area was St. Mary's, and it quickly became overrun and with a waiting list. And so Catholic families, Air Force families could not, they were not able to send their kids to school, a Catholic school. And so the Air Force, actually the chaplain and the wife of the commander of SAC got together and they built what was then called Cardinal Spellman School. And initially it was kindergarten to 6th grade, and then it expanded to 8th grade. And they got nuns from Des Moines to come and be the teachers. And this provided, education for Air Force families who have a difficulty when they come into an area because they're only there for 2 years. It's tough to get on a waiting list or get into the school. And so this really filled a niche for those Air Force Catholic families. Cardinal Spellman School. And then in the 1990s, about 1996, finally someone said, and I just wanted to say one more thing, the SAC bases around the country would actually take a collection at their Catholic services on the weekend once a month, and they would send funds to Cardinal Spellman School to support it. So you had the Air Force bases supporting this school that was in Bellevue, Nebraska. But in 1990s, 1996 specifically, somebody raised the flag and said you can't have this school being supported by the military, separation of church and state, which didn't make any sense. But so the archdiocese took it over from the military archdiocese and formed a parish there, St. Matthew's Parish, and turned the school over to them for maintaining the school. And it's doing quite well today. It's now expanded from K to 8th grade. It's all civilian teachers. It's got about 200 students and a wide variety of students. It's not just Air Force students that attend this, but there are a large number of minorities. There's African American, there's Hispanic. There are a lot of immigrants that come into the area that take advantage of this school. So obviously you can't do this for free, and the tuition at St. Matthew's per pupil is about $3,500 per year. So that's a big burden on families. And certainly this scholarship opportunity would be certainly a benefit to a lot of families in the Bellevue area. But $3,500 per student, that's about half of what it costs to send a pupil to public schools. In other words, it costs half as, thank you, Mr. President, it costs half as much to send a child to a private school as it does to a public school. And that is all the way from elementary up through high school. There was a question about how the parochial schools, religious schools discriminate. I can tell you at St. Matthew's, we do not discriminate. I spoke to the principal about this, and nowhere on the application does it have any reference to the type of family that is coming to St. Matthew's. And I know from my wife, we do have a student that has 2 moms. So the Archdiocese of Omaha has no policy about discriminating against an LBGT family. So I strongly support St. Matthew's. I hope that you'll support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Holdcroft. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 753, obviously against the motion to recommit to committee. I heard the question posed a little while ago, can we do this and should we do this? And I think the answer to both of those questions is a resounding yes. Can we do this? Fiscally, we have the ability to do this. But otherwise, folks have suggested there could be constitutional concerns with this. And I think specifically they're looking at Article 7, Section 11 of the Nebraska Constitution. But the Nebraska Supreme Court has made clear that that constitutional provision is only implicated by a direct appropriation to private school, yes. And it has to be directly to that institution to implicate the constitutional provision. And they've indicated that time and again. And here we're not talking about a direct appropriation to a private. That's provision of the Constitution is not implicated by what we're talking about here, by the Opportunity Scholarship Program. And so the next question becomes, should we do this? And as I just suggested, I think the answer there also is a resounding yes. As a member of the Revenue Committee, I've had the opportunity the last several years, probably 5 years in a row, to sit at a hearing where we have talked about opportunity scholarships, and typically we have an overflow number of young folks that come and tell us their experiences with private schools. And these kids typically come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Many of them come from poverty. Many of them talk about being bullied in their previous school setting. They talk about the benefits of their private education. And the common theme with their testimony is one of transformation. They talk about how transformative their private school education was for them. And so this bill really is about creating opportunity for the kids that came and testified and kids just like them, for all kids. That's why it's called Opportunity Scholarships. Others suggest, well, we're harming public education by doing this, and that's simply not true. It is not going to harm public education one bit. Currently, we dedicate roughly $1 billion in TOSA or equalization aid to public schools in Nebraska. We add in some of the other things, SPED and several other programs. We're currently putting in $1.5 billion directly into public schools in Nebraska. If you look at the 1107 credit, that could be considered, that really is in support of public education in Nebraska. That's another $560 million. I would suggest a percentage of the property tax credit fund, probably $200 million of that is essentially in support of public education. So there's roughly $2.25 billion of public money, of state money that we're directing towards K-12 public education currently, either directly or indirectly. And with the governor's proposals, depending on how things, how you do the math on those, we're talking another $350 to $400 million per year, directly and indirectly, dedicated towards public education in Nebraska. So at the end of the day, I would submit to you that within a few years, we'll be directing $2.6 to $2.7 billion in state dollars towards public education in Nebraska. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about $25 million a year. Granted, it's going to grow, but it's going to be $25 million a year for several years at the most. Now, I'm not a math major, but that is, thank you, Mr. President, but that is less than 1% of what we currently put into public education. This is not going to harm public education one bit. And colleagues, this is something that a large swath of Nebraskans and a large swath of your constituents really want. And it's time to respect their wishes on this. We're not harming public education. We're not taking dollars away from public education. And I would submit to you that it's something we need to try. We owe it to Nebraskans to do this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Hardin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Business expert Peter Drucker was famous, among other things, for asking, "What's your business? How's business?" Those are two good questions for lots more than business. In 2022, the legislature sponsored the At a Glance reports for the 244 school districts in the state. What I'd like to do is talk you through my journey of taking a look at that document. Each one-page report has a number of different things on it, and if you're not familiar with it, be glad to send it to you. It's a big link and takes a long time to download. Essentially, on each page, what you see is a number of different things: median household income, average ACT score in a given school system, average math and English scores for 5th graders and 8th graders. Interestingly, in 2022, following COVID, 11th grade scores in standardized testing were not published, though they were in earlier years. And what I found that was tragic as I looked across my own school districts in District 48 were successful scores, proficient scores of between 30% and 50%. That means more than half of the students are not successful at getting through the proficiency tests. I've heard it asked, well, are they just teaching to the proficiency test? Well, I would point out that every test is something that a teacher is preparing students for. They're always teaching to a test somewhere at some point. The parents who would like to have another option are simply saying, that's not good enough. Half the kids failing in our district in math or in English is not good enough. We would like another option. Additionally, parents cannot afford exorbitant property taxes and then pivot and pay again for schooling for some other option. LB 753 is about leveling that field for some parents. They're also very concerned in some cases about social experiments with their child serving as the petri dish. They're not excited about what that does to a kid's psyche, development, faith, moral well-being. They would like another option. And so I would ask the question, what's the business of education in Nebraska? How's business? You know, as I took a look at those 244 school districts, I thought, well, maybe it's just that Bigger schools do better than smaller schools. Maybe smaller schools do better than large schools. So I did some cross-examination of all of that data, and I compared school districts of like size. The fact is, there is quite a dichotomy. None of them are exceedingly high. I also wondered if there was a big drop-off since these at-a-glance reports took place in 2022, and comparing them to what happened before COVID. Were scores better? They should have been. I looked at 2019. I was disappointed because there was not a big difference in the scores. I also got a hold of the raw data with standardized testing and looked back to the early 2000s.
1 minute.
There was not a dramatic change in the scoring throughout most of that period of time. Maybe it's a lousy test. Is that a possibility? It's just a bad test. The challenge is that while certain schools do score poorly, 30%, 40%, 50% proficient, there are some examples of those that do score 10, 20, 30 points better of the same size school taking the test at the same time. All of that together says to me, we need to take that less than 1% that Senator Breezy was just talking about and present another option. That is what parents are asking for. I stand in support of LB 753. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hardin. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I rise in support of Senator Hunt's motion to recommit and opposed to LB 753, as I always have. And I appreciate, as always, the work of everybody on this issue, and I do respect the position of the folks who are in favor of this bill. And I think that they do come from a sincere desire to improve the lot in life of children in the state of Nebraska, make sure that everybody has an opportunity at a high quality education. But my issue, I mean, I have a number of them with this bill, but my biggest issue with the Opportunity Scholarship is really whose opportunity are we talking about? And so everybody wants to talk about how this provides an opportunity to kids to choose a different school. But that's not what it does. It creates a preferred tax structure where people do get to direct their tax dollars to a specific scholarship fund that funds institutions. And then those scholarship funds and institutions get to receive that money, and they get to choose whether or not they accept a student. They get to choose which students they want. So what this bill would do is create a fund by diverting tax dollars to allow institutions to pick which students they want and then not charge those students. Sure, certain students can look and say, now I have a chance to go to a school I couldn't afford. But the things that are in their power at that point are that they can apply to that school, they can ask for the scholarship. They are not guaranteed entry, and they're not guaranteed to get that scholarship. So this is not about putting power in the hands of parents and children. It's putting it in the power in the hands of these institutions that are allowed to discriminate. I know everybody wants to say, but mine doesn't. Mine's the good one. I'm part of this organization. Of course they don't discriminate. But they do. They can, and they will. We had on, I think it was the first round of debate, Senator Hunt presented an amendment that would have required that anybody who takes this money cannot discriminate. And that amendment was defeated. If these places weren't discriminating, if they didn't want to discriminate, and if they didn't have the power to discriminate, that amendment would have been no problem. Would have said, okay, no skin off our back, we'll accept that amendment. We will hold ourselves to that standard. But the reason there's opposition to an anti-discrimination requirement in this bill is because the institutions we're talking about shifting these tax dollars to do discriminate and hope to continue to discriminate, want to continue to discriminate. And when we talk about discrimination, of course, I know everybody says mine's the good one. We don't want it. We won't do that. Then why don't they accept that change? So my opposition to this bill has been in these 3 years, in whatever iteration it has taken, and continues to be about the fact that we are directing government money to institutions that can discriminate. But ultimately, like I said at the beginning, that
One minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. For whichever reason they choose not to accept a student, the schools can still choose not to accept the student. I appreciate what Senator Linehan said about changing option enrollments and making sure that kids don't get boxed out of option enrollments. I think that's a good move. I don't think our public schools should discriminate either. I don't think any of these schools should, especially if you're getting government funds. But that's the thing here. This is not about, we are creating a structure that puts the decision-making authority not in the hands of parents and children. It gives them the chance to ask, but it does not allow them to choose. They don't get to be the ultimate decider of whether they go to these schools. And that is a problem. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. What we heard in the Revenue Committee from the public schools was that a tax credit takes money from the general fund. And the next sentence is the one that really shocked me. That's money that could be spent on public schools. And it shocks me because they seemed to have an entitled opinion that any money that is a tax credit could have been going to a public school, that it was entitled to go to them. Tax credits are used to incentivize behavior, and we have many, many tax credits in this state. All of these tax credits also take from the general fund. Nebraska Child and Dependent Care Credit, Nebraska Property Tax Incentive, Nebraska Property Tax Incentive with community college taxes, School Readiness Tax Credit for providers, tax credit for purchase of residence in extremely blighted areas, credit for the elderly or disabled, Community Development Assistance Tax Credit, Nebraska Historic Tax Credit, Nebraska Affordable Housing Tax Credit, Employers Credit for expenses incurred for TANF recipients, Qualified Volunteer Responders Credit, Military Retirement Income Exemptions, Social Security exemptions. All of this is just a handful of the ones that we actually have. So according to the public schools, all of that is money that should go to them. They are entitled. The person who I had that discussion with was the former superintendent of OPS, Cheryl Logan. And I did point out to her that OPS has reading scores of 22% proficiency. Their science scores are 21%, and their math scores are 16% proficiency. It's clearly not working for everyone, and every child deserves the right to try somewhere else if they could do better elsewhere. Reading ability is directly correlated with crime rates. We are failing our kids in some of these public schools, so this is a small tool to use to get kids who want to try and want to achieve into some place that fits them better. We're also setting aside $1 billion this year and nearly $1 billion over the next 3 years into an education fund for the public schools. The Opportunity Scholarship is an absolute minuscule amount. It's a tiny tool. And I moved here from Iowa about 10 and a half years ago. We had scholarship tax credits there, and it worked very well. It didn't destroy any of the public schools. I think they barely noticed a ripple. It did allow people to move out into a school that fit them better. And as we all know, not everybody is a right fit for a public school. At that point, I'd like to yield my time to Senator Armendariz.
Senator Armendariz, you have 1 minute and 53 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Kauth. Many of you may remember that this particular scholarship would have affected me growing up, I would have been able to take advantage of it. I would fall in that range. I want to bring our attention to the incentive of the 100% tax credit. And over to another bill that we're currently debating, LB 50. How it was explained to me is we want to encourage inmates to take programming. All of Nebraska wants inmates to take programming before they're released. We talk about them jamming out without any programming. So we're discussing how do we further incentivize inmates to take programming? Well, we reduce the number of years of until they're eligible for parole. You can't get paroled unless you've gone through the programming. So we're trying to incentivize with additional incentives to get the programming done. Thank you, Mr. President. We want this programming done because we think this will contribute to a better society when inmates are then released. So we're adding additional incentive for them. Not unlike the Opportunity Scholarship, we're adding additional incentive for people to participate because we as a state find it very important to help this group, this particular group of kids that are underserved, have a different choice. We think that'll contribute to a better way of life for them, give them exposure that they would otherwise not have. And we're talking about children here having a better way of life. I believe a lot of senators support reducing the parole eligibility year. Why wouldn't we contribute to an additional incentive to help these poor children in these communities?
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, fellow Nebraskans out there watching this on TV. Yes, that is a true statement. We give, as Senator Linehan says, we give pages and pages of tax credits to a number of entities. But the one thing that sets this apart from any of the others is this is explicitly a tax credit for charitable giving. So I think we really should call this the opportunity tax credit for our trusts, for corporations, for LLCs, for partnerships, and wealthy individuals. How do we know that? Because it's a dollar for dollar tax credit. So say you have a $200,000 tax liability. That means someone who gives a $100,000 donation gets a dollar for dollar offset to that $200,000 tax obligation. So that means their tax obligation drops to $100,000. So that's additional tax revenue that all of the state of Nebraska is losing. Keep that in mind. We just lost $100,000 in tax revenue from that entity that got that dollar for dollar tax credit. Who's benefiting? I handed out a map that shows 48, and these are all the dark states, 48 out of the 93 counties don't have access to private schools. They have public schools. Senator Linehan pointed out that some of those kids cross counties. Okay, that means these kids have to travel, 40 miles to get to a private school. Who's benefiting from this? These rural communities, I want to say thank you. Thank you, rural communities. Your hard-working taxpayer dollars are going towards this private fund. Okay, people are saying that, hey, this is not going to hurt public schools. This won't take away. Well, we've just given that $100,000 tax revenue loss to fellow Nebraskans who have to pick up that slack, which means our hardworking middle-class Nebraskans have to pay it. Here's how it impacts public schools. Keep in mind that our public education is the greatest equalizer in our society. Public education schools provide for all kids, all kids. So is there going to be double dipping from those non-public schools? So there are 36,656 kids in the state of Nebraska that go to these private schools. 2,152 are special ed kids. Are they going to double dip and count that special ed kid as one of their scholarship recipients? But guess what? Those 2,152 special ed kids are served by our public schools. And here how it impacts our public education dollars. So they have suggested that private school scholarship tax credits won't take away public funds from Nebraska schools. A new estimate of the bill's impact from the Legislative Fiscal Office indicates that a reduction in state aid to school funds distributed through the TIOSA say it's possible. Here's how it happens. Say we give $25 million and say an estimated 5,000 currently attending public school go to the private schools. That means that there would be a reduction of about $11.8 million to public education. Guess what? Our hardworking teachers, what do? They
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. They pay for school supplies from their own funds to help kids who don't have school supplies. And guess what else, friends? There are a number of states, yes, that have offered these type of opportunity tax credits, but guess who is rescinding that? Kansas legislature ditches voucher plan that extended to unregulated private schools, sort of doing a repeat of their erroneous, let's give more corporate and individual tax credits out there and tax reductions. So they have decided to squash that bill. Also, the state of Texas last week, and this was from January, voted against using public funding for school vouchers. 24 Republicans joined Democrats to signal their opposition to these vouchers and tax credits. So we're seeing that other communities are realizing that this is not benefiting anyone. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I want to extend my gratitude to Senator Linehan as well for her leadership on education issues, revenue issues, and so many issues. I'm not sure if there's a major issue before the legislature that she's not involved in, and I really appreciate how she conducts herself in terms of being able to have a principled approach, even when we find ourselves in principled disagreement. And I am grateful for the work that she has done to try and bring additional equity and resources to our public education system. And I understand and appreciate her perspective and other members' perspective that while they are committed to lifting up our public schools, they also want to strengthen opportunities outside of our public schools in terms of our educational system. So we have a sincere yet fundamental disagreement in terms of the approach with this measure before us. And I want to lift up just a couple of key points. So my friend Senator Kauth and Senator Linehan and others who have mentioned it are 100% right. There are a host of tax incentive programs and tax credit programs that are part of our statutory framework governing revenue issues and tax issues. I find that those arguments, however, are distinguishable for really one primary reason. And while we absolutely have tax programs in place to incentivize behaviors that we want to see in economic development or in other aspects of society, I believe that they are distinguishable in this instance because of the no aid provisions in our state constitution under Article 7, Section 11. And I think that has been discussed in previous rounds of debate. I lift it again because I do think it is distinguishable from a legal perspective. And I also want to note that another thing that is distinguishable from some of my colleagues' arguments otherwise is every dollar, every decision related to every dollar absolutely does have implications for other areas of our budget. So if we commit more dollars to economic development, that's less for healthcare. If we commit more to healthcare, that's less for infrastructure. They absolutely are interrelated, even in at all levels of scope and size. So that does need, those dots do need to be connected. That being said, different members can have different policy choices or priorities for how to utilize that same pot of resources. My contention, and I think it's backed up when you look at the strong commitment Nebraskans have for their public schools, which they love and continue to support. And when they speak out in this legislature on these and other issues, including the transformational funding that we've worked very hard together to provide to our schools and to lift up important resources for students with special needs. The one thing that's important to remember, in my perspective, is that Nebraska has a long and proud tradition of loving our public schools from our very founding forward. And that's because they educate the majority of our kids. And it was such an issue of tantamount importance that it's placed in our state constitution. When you look at, thank you, Mr. President, in Article 7, Section 1, the very first component in regards to education, and there's a whole section on education, including the non-aid provision, it talks about the paramount importance of our public schools and how we fund them, and the right of every student to receive access to a quality education. And that's what we have to keep in mind in terms of priority and hierarchy. I also would just like to note that, yes, schools have struggled in the pandemic and in the wake thereof, but Nebraska consistently ranks at the top of those lists we want to be at when it comes to student performance. So I believe that we can and should continue to lift up our public schools, and if other members choose to create other paths to a private education, that is their province. I am in principled and disagreement with that, and I think there are policy, practical, and legal concerns. I'm grateful for our teachers and for our hardworking school professionals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Conrad. Senator Sanders, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. President and colleagues. I stand in support of LB 753. I want to say again that Opportunity Scholarship Act is one of the best ways this state can support special needs education. I know we discussed this when we debated LB 583, my TOSA bill on behalf of our governor. Nebraska is making historical investments in special need education, and LB 753 will help. It is proven school choice policies help parents find the ideal learning environment for the unique needs of their child. A growing number of parents are finding out that the best place for their child with special needs is in private schools. Our public schools often do a wonderful job educating our children with special needs. It is vital for us to give parents a choice when their child would thrive better in a private school. Unfortunately, parents with limited financial resources have no choice. LB 583 would change that. As I said on general file, I want to emphasize LB 583 prioritizes supporting children. The bill creates a 5-tier program to determine who should be prioritized for opportunity scholarships. Students whose households are below poverty and who have an individualized education plan known as an IEP are prioritized over all other first-time applicants for a scholarship, with the exceptions of siblings of current recipients. I do want to mention the 2 private schools that operate in Nebraska solely for those in need. Both schools, Madonna in Omaha, Villa Marie in Waverly, would qualify under this bill. So to close, I will support LB 753 as it will help low-income students and students with disabilities, that they find a school that they will not only thrive in, but succeed. Finally, we continue to hear that LB 753 will not take away money from public schools. To reiterate, this is not true. On the contrary, public schools would save money. I saw a great quote the other day from our neighboring state from the Iowa Governor, Kim Reynolds. She says, I quote, "Iowa will be funding students, not systems. Iowa has stepped up, and so should we." I yield the remaining of my time to Senator Justin Wayne. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Wayne, you have 2 minutes, 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Sanders. Ironically, somebody just tagged me in a tweet. I'm literally wearing the same outfit I wore on this debate. That's kind of embarrassing. Didn't know that was going to happen. So we'll start with that. Colleagues, this year in this body, we are doing what I think some transformational changes, particularly for areas of East Omaha that has never been done before. And it's a multifaceted approach that Senator McKinney and I, if we haven't told you, thank you for this. And this is part of that. We are focusing on the economic development in 531. We are working on criminal justice and some reentry reforms in LB 50. Overall, with Senator Sanders' investment in $30 million on OPS, and now this bill is kind of like bringing up everything that we've already done and putting it all together by saying we are going to give parents the power and the ability to make a choice. When you add that multifaceted approach, that's how fundamental change happens in North Omaha and South Omaha.
1 minute.
You're providing parents with jobs. You're providing a school system with more money. But then you're also providing those parents who maybe feel that that public school isn't fitting for their kid an opportunity to go somewhere else. There are successes already happening in East Omaha when it comes to choice. There are schools like Nelson Mandela that are successful. We need to grow those type of successes by making sure that there is the funding streams to allow that to happen. That is our role. So this is just part of that. Don't be afraid of that. Get out of the political talk and look at the fundamental change we are making in this community. I support this because this multifaceted approach is what we're supposed to do down here to make sure that we raise the water and tides for everyone so we can all move forward and have a better Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Albright, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I'm rising in support of LB 753 and against the recommit motion. Colleagues, I'd like to visit about how Nebraska compares to Florida. Florida families have been enjoying school choice for over 20 years, while Nebraska remains one of only 2 states in the country with no school choice policies to help families find their best educational fit for their children, regardless of income or zip code. This information that I'll share with you explores how students perform in both states and how it's changed over time. So between 2003 and 2022, Nebraska's 8th grade reading performance growth is -7. That puts Nebraska 38th in the United States. Florida and Arizona, both states with school choice programs that grew during those years, are in the top 10 for performance growth. During this same time, Florida closed their achievement gap between Black and white students by -11 points, whereas Nebraska's gap grew by 2 points. Both states closed the gap between white and Hispanic students, but Florida's gap closed by much more. Today, Hispanic students in Florida are a full year and a half ahead of Hispanic students in Nebraska, and 8th grade reading 265 to 240. Black students in the Florida performed 11 points higher today, the rough equivalent of 1 year in school, 247 to 236. Florida's free and reduced eligible students gained 7 points in 8th grade reading during this time, growth that puts Florida at number 3 in the country. Nebraska free and reduced eligible students lost 5 points, putting Nebraska in 37th place. At a time when Florida scores increased and surpassed Nebraska scores, particularly for historically disadvantaged groups, participation in the state's tax credit school program grew. Now, I'd also like to visit a little bit about the academic excellence in Nebraska private schools. Students attending K through 12 non-public schools in Nebraska and nationwide have a record academic excellence, even across various demographics. Peer-reviewed evaluations indicate that factors such as high graduation standards and consistent commitment from staff, not cherry picking, are all likely causes of their success. Non-public school students in Nebraska consistently exceed the state's ACT average, including the most recent school year. So Nebraska's graduating seniors' ACT average, Nebraska for non-public schools is 23.2. State or public and non-public is 19.4, and Nebraska's public schools is 19. The Catholic Diocese seniors' ACT averages in 2022 were the Omaha Archdiocese at 24.5, Lincoln at 23.1, and Grand Islands at 22.9. The ACT readiness benchmarks, with students meeting all four, Nebraska non-public schools is at 39%, state public and non-public is at 20%, and Nebraska public schools at 18%. I think it's important to note the average amount, U.S. average for spending per students in 2002 was $7,727, where total public in 2020 is $15,771. I'd just like to stand in support of this bill because it does give parents a choice and children an opportunity. When you're in situations that you just don't know what else to do, you have to be able to have that choice. And when it comes to tax credits, if I have to pay in and I get half, and I can get this tax credit to go where I want my money to be spent, already I have to give my money to a lot of different entities in our state to continue to grow, whether it's NRDs, fire departments, schools. Everybody has to pay whether you want to or not. But if this is a tax credit that you want to give to, just like if we want to give to pregnancy help centers throughout our state, if we get 33 votes and we're able to support this, that's the choice that people will have to spend their money the way they would like. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am not going to sit here and bash our Nebraska public schools. We have very good public schools in our state, and it is something that we should be proud of. I was on school board prior to coming here, especially after COVID. Nebraska schools were shut down just like all the others across the nation from March till May or June of 2020. But guess what we did in our state? We reopened and our kids were there in person starting in the fall of that. We have done a good job. This bill provides just a different option for parents that want something that might work differently for their child. It might be better for that child. It doesn't mean our public schools are bad. It's just different. One of my main concerns with LB 753 was to prevent inadvertently creating a tax shelter where tax credits could go without corresponding growth in scholarships for low-income kids that they're intended to support. So with an amendment that we provided last round on Select, it requires that SGOs cannot carry more than 25% of its net revenue from one year to the next, and that any amount carried forward has to be expended for educational scholarships. If these carry forward dollars are not expended for scholarships within the SGO, they can transfer them to another SGO in need. And if the SGOs cannot utilize these funds, then the money is returned to the general fund of the state of Nebraska. The other piece that we added in that amendment was additional information provided to the legislature, specifically the Appropriations, Education, and Revenue Committees on a biannual basis. The purpose of this enhanced reporting requirements is to provide future legislatures with a greater ability to understand and evaluate this bill and whether it's working as intended, if it has any issues or any changes need to be made. And some of the things that are going to be reported include, but are not limited to, the review of the progress of the Opportunity Scholarships Act, the number of students currently waitlisted or denied from receiving an education scholarship and the reason for the waitlist or denial, the dollar amount of the education scholarships given by the SGOs, and the demographic information of students that receive these scholarships, including but not limited to income level, grade level, and geographic location. So we as a legislature are going to monitor this program and make sure it's doing what is intended and not different than that. So thank you, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Moser, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, this is round number 3 of the discussion of this bill, and public schools are great, but they're not the best fit for everybody. And a lot of us can afford private school tuition if our children want to go to a private school. My wife and I have 3 children, and 2 of them went to parochial school and 1 went to public school. And the schools were just a good fit for them. They all did well. On a side note, none of them live in my basement, so that's a good thing. And I just want that opportunity for people who can't afford to send their child to private school if they feel that that's a good fit for them. So in order to qualify for this scholarship, you have to be lower income. Well, you have to be on free and reduced lunch. I think it's a wonderful thing. It doesn't take money from public schools. Public schools weren't going to get this money anyway. And I think it's kind of ironic to even bring up that argument when we're already giving public schools hundreds of millions of increased funding this year, as we should. We've come up short in funding our public schools, and that's why property taxes are so high. But if we wanted to help schools, we'd stop doing TIF, because TIF gives hundreds of millions of dollars to developers that would otherwise go to schools. That's a direct deduction from what money the schools could be getting. TIF creates economic activity. True, it's increased valuation, but it comes from economic activity that probably would have gone someplace else. It just develops a property that was blighted and substandard. So, and as far as the tax credit being 100%, the person who donates the money can only use that to offset tax that they owe. So they can't make money on it. The money is donated to an SGO, and they're going to decide who and what school gets that tuition money. You know, I think it's a great program. I admire Senator Linehan for bringing this back and for her tenacity and trying to make this work. In my district, the public schools, well, in Columbus, I'll say, I'm not going to say the whole district because I don't have the figures for that, but in Columbus, we have 5,000 students in the public system, and we have 1,400 students in parochial schools. There's Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, Baptist schools, non-denominational Christian school. If those 1,400 students went to public school, that's 30% of the load that they currently have. And the city of Columbus School District is already landlocked. So they get TIOSA. And without these private schools, they would have more needs. They'd have the same assets, resources. And so their TIOSA would go way up. They might have more TIOSA than anybody in the state. I don't know. You'd have to do the math. But it's a complicated problem. I think we're way behind the curve. Other states have already passed bills like this. And I think we should. I support 753. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moser. Senator Bostman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska.
I stand opposed to the recommit motion. I do support LB 753. A couple things. I'm not going to reiterate what many of you have already said on the mic. I do agree with Senator Wayne that this is significant legislation that we're doing as a package for public schools and private schools both. Significant changes we're doing in funding and providing funds to our public schools. As Senator Mosier says, this does not take away any tax funds from our public schools. But what I come down to many times as I talk to superintendents and teachers and others across in my district is this is about children. This is about children. If there's a child in a school who, for whatever reason, is not able to perform to their learning ability, if they're not able to learn, for whatever reason that might be, and there's another school that they know that they can do better, that other school may provide them the instruction, the teaching, the one-on-one or what it might be to help that student reach their potential, and that happens to be a private school. What this bill does, if they can't afford it, it gives that family that ability to send that student to that school, and give that student that opportunity to learn at their full potential, to give them the opportunity in life to grow and do as much as they can through education. I think that's what we all want, and I know that is the intent of this. I know that that's what we all want as teachers, as parents, as grandparents. I do fully support LB 753, and I yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Linehan, you have 2 minutes, 55 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Bosman, and thank you for your statements just now. I want to thank everybody in here, everybody on the floor, all the senators who've helped me, not just on this bill, but my whole time I've been in the legislature. Special shout out to my class and Senator Clemens, who's got dropped in on us a little bit behind us, but pretty close. This is a huge group effort, and I don't know how many times I'm going to have a chance to speak, so I'm going to do some thank yous to all of you, to the governor and his support, and his team, and to all the people that have worked on this for years. There's really no way to explain how much I appreciate everyone. Senator Wayne, he and I came in together. This first time I met him was at a school choice event in, I think it was at the, it was in a museum downtown. First time I met him. He was just as funny as he is today. One of the things I did want to respond to, Senator Ray Bolden, I did talk to her off the mic on this. It is true with the maps that she handed out that there are several counties that don't have private schools, but just like when you go west of here, you have all kinds of, well, there's several counties in the Panhandle that only have one public school. You go west of here, there are several students have to cross county lines. I crossed county lines when I went to public school. That's very normal in greater Nebraska. So on my staff, and I should thank my staff too, because they've worked very hard on this. Ryan on my staff, without any direction from me, frankly, put together a whole group of where there's public schools and where the kids go, and he's got the maps over there. He'd be glad to share with you. There are only 4 counties in the state of Nebraska, 4, that don't have children in private school. So when we say there's no options out in rural Nebraska, that's just not true. O'Neill, Nebraska, well, Senator Breezy, my good friend, partner on education and revenue, I think he's got a couple. Elgin, Nebraska, I think about half the kids are in public school and half the kids are in private school. And then I don't think Humphrey is any longer in his district, but Humphrey is the same situation. O'Neill, Nebraska, North Platte Catholic. We have a lot of options for schools across the state. And again, I appreciate all your help. I appreciate all the people that are, the list is way too long for me to mention.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Aguilar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, members. Good morning, Nebraska. I've been a co-sponsor of LB 753 since I came back to the legislature, and been right along beside Senator Linehan in trying to get this accomplished. Now's the time to get it done. One of the things I want to talk about is during that time, I had public school representatives come to me and tell me how unfair this was because the parochial schools did not accept special ed children. So I went back to the parochial schools and asked that question. Superintendent said, "That's simply not true, Senator," and then proceeded to show me the list of the special ed kids they had in attendance, and it was significant. One of the other things I'd like to discuss is before I came back to the legislature, I spent 10 years in a private school and 10 years in a public school. And it was pretty obvious who was at a funding disadvantage. So there is no reason why you can say this is not a fair situation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the balance of my time to Senator Justin Wayne.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Senator Wayne, you have 3 minutes, 25 seconds.
Thank you, colleagues. This is a bill that I just don't understand why the politics is the way it is. When I was first on the school board, I was against any kind of school choice. Didn't matter. And the deal was, for me, I had the ability as a school board member to move the needle on Omaha Public Schools. We came down here for 2 years in a row, and we finally shrunk the school board. I thought it was too encumbersome to have 12 people on a school board. We shrunk it to 9. We came out with our first ever strategic plan and needs analysis, where we had people come in and do over 2,000 visits in classrooms. That needs analysis showed a lot of gaps that we had to fill. And as I began looking through that needs analysis, and you can still find it from 2013, the fact of the matter is the system, and it's just not OPS, it's across the state, is sometimes too big to move and too big to be nimble enough to work with the families and be there for the families. So some of the kids I coached, I used to always quote a Malcolm X, but it was actually Frederick Douglass, but Malcolm X made it famous. Education is the passport to the future. For tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. And that was kind of my big thing that I always pushed on my kids that I coached. Education, education. Doesn't mean 4-year college, but education. Get your basics. And one of them decided they wanted to go to a private school. They couldn't do it. Our organization held a couple fish fries, a couple car washes. We raised them. He was able to go to a school, a private school. Cost a lot of money. That fundamentally changed that kid's life. We removed him from a public school and put him there. I know, because the kid damn near lived with me. And at that point, even when I was on the school board, I began questioning how do we not allow a parent to make that choice just based off of income? And it wasn't until this young man came back to me and said, if you think education is the passport to the future,
1 minute,
then why is it that every parent, regardless of income, shouldn't be able to give their kid the best passport or a passport? And that's where we started having some hard conversations on the school board. And one year we came down neutral on a school choice bill because people on that school board started figuring out that might not be the only choice. But I'll never forget that. That parent couldn't do it, and they had a community come around and put that kid who is no longer living in Nebraska. He is living in California, doing extremely well. I think now he's in Utah. But I'll never forget that. Why shouldn't every parent have that same opportunity? And why should that only be limited by income? if we truly care about the kids and we talk about it's for their kids, we have to make sure.
Senator.
I was getting to a great ending. Thank you,
Senator
Mr. President.
Wayne. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me first begin by following up a little bit on Senator Hughes's comments about public schools. I'm a product of public schools. My children went to public school. I'm really fortunate living where I do in District 42. We have 10 public schools that are domiciled within the district, and virtually every one of them are performing at the highest levels in the at-a-glance ratings. And so I'm proud of what the public schools are doing in District 42. But this bill is not really about public schools. This bill, in my mind, is what Senator Wayne's talked about and what Senator Linehan's talked about. And it's about giving kids of lesser means an opportunity to have the best fit for them. We've had option enrollment for quite some time. I look at where we're at with North Platte Public, and I look at the small schools that are around North Platte Public, and there's a huge amount of net option enrollment students at Hershey, at Maxwell, at Brady. I also have at my school district, the smallest school district in the nation, McPherson County School at Tryon, that has just over 50 students. I can tell you that parents, because of net option program and option enrollment, allow them to put their kids in the school where it's the best fit. I believe that parochial schools and private schools play a role in student choice. And that's why I'm supportive of LB 753. We've heard a lot of talk about this is for wealthy people. Well, what this is about, if we really unpack that, is it's people of means or some means being able to contribute to those who don't have means to be able to enroll in these schools. I'm not sure there's anything morally wrong with that. If we have people who are willing to contribute, yes, get a tax credit so that they can help disadvantaged students have choice where they can be in the best fit. We've talked a lot about children. We've talked about wanting to support children. Getting children a quality education that fits for them should be one of the highest priorities here. And this will help make that happen. 48 other states can't be wrong that this is part of the mix. It's not an exchange for the public system at all. I can tell you that with the private schools in North Platte itself, there are multiple schools, parochial and private, that operate fairly successfully, two of them very successfully. But I just think this comes down to what's the right place for every kid to excel in what they're doing and be productive citizens and be the best that they can be. I will also tell you that I worked with early on. I think Senator Linehan was overly happy with me. I had some concerns about whether there could be some double dipping in this, and Senator Linehan worked with me to make those changes in the bill. I know that Senator Hughes, Senator DeKay, Senator Brandt, and I worked together on creating some amendments to this, which Senator Linehan worked with us on, that creates the reportability and so on, to be able to make this program not only a good program out of the gate, but that we can see that there's accountability as we move forward. So people that are concerned about accountability, we do have that piece covered, and I think this is a great first step. So I'm very supportive of what we're doing here. This again is not about throwing shots at public schools. This is about giving every student in the state of Nebraska, whether they have the means to go to private school or not, an opportunity to where they could and get into the right fit. And I was going to yield time to Senator Linehan, but I don't think she wants 25 seconds, so I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Lippincott, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, sir. During my campaign, I knocked on over 6,000 doors in my area. And by far, the number one concern that people had was what's going on in schools. and they watch the evening news and they see children being taught things that they don't want. And so there's an accountability issue. Now, first, I like to always tell people when talking about this subject that if all the schools in the state were like the ones in my district, Aurora, Central City, Palmer, Silver Creek, Northwest High School, and Grand Island, Central City, the world would be a wonderful place because they truly are good schools. I've spoken with all the superintendents, and they do it right. And I'm grateful for that. But the underlying principle is that competition is always a great thing. I remember listening to Casper Weinberger, the former Secretary of Defense for Ronald Reagan, and he said this. He said, competition is a good thing, and it is. Because with competition, you keep costs low and quality high. And when you have a monopoly, oftentimes you find that cost is high and quality, not so much. Looking at the numbers here in Nebraska, and these are current Nebraska numbers, to send one child through public school, it costs $1,000 a month, 12 months, $12,000 per child, public school. Fact. For private schools here in Nebraska, that figure is $3,700 per student per year. So $12,000 public school, private school, 3.7, and if you homeschool the child, it's $1,000 a month. And I figured out on my calculator that $1,000 is less than $12,000. So anyway, that's something to look at. And regarding test scores, homeschools, they're number one, private schools, number two, and then you've got public schools. As a matter of fact, I've looked on the internet and I've searched around. You'll never find that spending more money for education results in a better product. Can't find it because it's not a fact. Take, for instance, our state budget. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I was really shocked when I started doing research for running for office that the University of Nebraska, well, actually education in general here in the state of Nebraska takes up 38% of our budget. I was shocked. The University of Nebraska, now again, our budget for the whole state of Nebraska is $5.1 billion. The budget for the University of Nebraska alone is $2.8 billion. It's quite a bit. Now, not all of that is tax money. Obviously, you've got tuition, but the state of Nebraska pays the University of Nebraska $600 million, your state money, and $600 million of your federal tax money. That's a lot. The university and other schools around the country, their tuition has increased on average 8% per year, which means it doubles in 9 years. That's 8 times faster than wages.
1 minute.
That's quite a bit. I wanted to just look practically at a school, Central City, the school I graduated from. And with this bill, LB 753, currently the budget for the schools in Central City is $10 million a year. Right now, they get $120,000 of state aid, $120,000. With LB 753, they'll get $2 million. Big difference between $2 million and $120,000. I support LB 753. I believe it will boost public schools and private schools here in the state of Nebraska. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. I listened to the debate this morning. I appreciate what Senator Wayne had to say. I appreciate Senator Linehan bringing this bill. It's a great start. Okay, and I say that in this regard. I introduced a bill this year on school choice We called it My Student, My Choice Act. That school choice bill would be 55% of what it costs to educate a student in the state of Nebraska into an education savings account. And you say, how much is that? It's about $7,700 per student. Very similar to what Iowa has done. That fiscal note would be nearly $3 billion. That gives everyone a choice. Now, Senator Linehan has designated this to help those that can't afford private education or another option than government schools. And I appreciate that, and I'm going to vote for this. But as I said, it's a great start. And so if you want to look up LB 177, that will describe for you what I'm talking about when I introduce that bill. Senator Jacobson mentioned about North Platte Public Schools, so I looked it up in the students or schools at a glance, which Senator Hardin spoke about. North Platte has 0 option students. No students are optioning in to North Platte greater than the number that are leaving. My guess is that the 155 students that option into Hershey are from North Platte. And Maxwell has 180 students optioning in. I would assume majority came from North Platte as well. The point is, these people have an option now to go to another school besides the government school that's in their district, and they're doing that. So why don't we give people an option to go to a school that fits their needs? And that's what this bill does, and I'll be voting for 753. I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator Linehan. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator McDonald, you're recognized to speak.
I yield my time to Senator Linehan.
Excuse me. Sorry, Senator. Senator Linehan, you have 4 minutes, 54 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to go back to, thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Lippincott, is Senator Lippincott still on the floor? And I didn't give him heads up, so that's really not fair. I'm sorry. I have 4 grandchildren live in his district, and they are at Aurora Public Schools, and I would agree with him. More importantly, my daughter-in-law loves Aurora Public Schools. They are amazing. Aurora is just kind of an amazing community, and I know there's communities like that all across Nebraska, and they have great public schools. But this is about where that's not the situation. And it could even be a great situation for some children and not for another child. I have, and you've all heard the story, well, maybe not all the freshmen have, but I've told it. When my children were small, we lived in a school district, great school district. People were building houses in the school district, moving there, but it didn't answer one of my children's needs. So we did what people with means can do. We went school shopping, literally drove around Douglas County, talking to superintendents and principals of schools, and we moved from one school district to the next. And then all of my children went through elementary school in that school, and then in high school, one stayed in public school because that was the best option for them, and then the others went to private high schools. They're all doing very well. I had those options. None of my grandchildren will income-wise would qualify for this bill. I don't think any of them are looking at a private option yet. They're all little. None of them are in high school yet.
1 minute.
But I don't understand how any of us can say that it's okay for people who can afford where I live, Elkhorn. People are paying $100,000 for a lot. Not the house, for the lot, so they can be in the Elkhorn School District. That needs to tell us something about how fair or unfair it is when you have a child or a child that's getting bullied and you don't have an option to take them somewhere else. It's just, we need to do this, folks. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Frederickson has some guests in the north balcony, 45 fourth graders from Oak Valley Elementary in Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator McDonald, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 753, and thinking back to 2017, one of the first discussions I had with Senator Linehan was about reading. And kids that up to the third grade, you learn to read, after that you read to learn. And she had statistics about all the kids in the state and what happens if you aren't successful at that point, and what we could do to try to fix that. How do we help those kids? That's what it was focused on, and it still is focused on that. If you look at Senator Linehan and the bills she's brought in the last 7 years and the work she's done on this, we can look at, for example, my LD5 is in OPS. And I have family members that teach at OPS. I think they do a great job, and I'm proud of their service. And if you look at going through OPS, and there's kids that aren't successful, there's some kids that are suspended and then expelled, and they're no longer part of OPS. So you ask yourself, where do those kids go? Well, one place they go is the street school. And you look at approximately 90% of the kids that are in the street school have been expelled, and about 90% of those kids are finding success there. They're graduating. So those are the kids that didn't work out for them. But then you look at the stats right now over the last 10 years, 12 years, and look at maybe the averages, and you can take out COVID, but look at just the normal kid going through school, and he's in high school and not finding success, and you're averaging about 75% of those kids that are graduating. So they're finding success in, for example, OPS. But what about the other 25% that it wasn't the right fit for? It didn't work out for them. So now we know we have kids that are, again, suspended, expelled, which I'm not saying they didn't deserve at that moment in time to be expelled. But without a high school education, we can start talking about our incarceration rate. We can talk about how many kids that at that moment in their life couldn't find a path to success, either through, for example, OPS, or through having the option to go to another school that was private, and then their life turned. And they had not the skill level and some bad decision making, and that came together, and now they are incarcerated for a crime that they committed. And talking about making that change and given kids the best opportunity to be the best version of themselves and removing those unfair hurdles, I believe that's part of our job as government. Every person has to run their race, but there is definitely some unfair hurdles here. And right now, through education, it's not the public schools. This bill is an anti-public school. It's just not. The emails that want to come in and the people that want to call and say we're going to destroy public school, that's not the case. And we are actually celebrating public school on what they do and the success rate they've had with a number of kids. But also we're looking out for those kids that were not successful in that setting, and what kind of options can we give them going forward to be the best version of themselves and find success. And that's what Senator Linehan's trying to do. That's what she's tried to do since 2017 when she entered this body. And it's always been about trying to help kids, all kids, and no matter what level they were at, but also those kids in public schools and private schools. I would yield the remainder of my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Linehan, that's 1 minute, 4 seconds. Senator Wayne, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator McDonald. Again, colleagues, I think Senator McDonald just made a great point. My goal is, I know we're probably not going to change the majority of people's minds one way or another on this bill, but I'm hoping at least one or two will see that this is not an anti-public school bill. This is a pro-parent bill. This is a bill that gives parents an option, that helps them give their kid a passport. The passport we all talk about, every kid should have an opportunity to get, that parents should have some control over where they put their kid at. This gives them a choice. When you look at East Omaha, and that's where I'm focused on. I can't really speak to the rest of the state and how the state deals with theirs. But when you look at the success rate that some of the schools that are having,
That's your time, Senator.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Von Gillern, you're next to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues and Nebraskans, I'm going to go completely off script, which is a little bit dangerous. And Senator Wayne, don't wander off too far because I want to yield you some time when I'm done. I think it's just, it's very compelling as I look up in the balcony today and I see the kids up there, and I'm grateful that they're here. I saw we just had a new group that came in that I'm sure will be introduced shortly, and judging by their uniforms, I think it's safe to say that we have kids representing both sides of the conversation in the balcony today. And I challenge my colleagues to look up in the balcony and look in the faces of any one of those kids and say that we don't want to give each one of them the absolute best opportunity for their education that is possible. And if that means sacrificing certain things along the way, then that's fantastic. But one of the things we absolutely are not sacrificing is anything to do with funding for public schools. And I do want to hit just on one of my comments that I had planned on saying, and that is to say that this bill takes money from public schools is the same as saying that every dollar spent on roads, bridges, hospitals, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless, and funding our public servants and first responders is also taking money away from public schools, and that is completely false. That is a narrative that is false. It's not true. That makes it a lie by definition, and I'm tired of hearing it. So let's stop saying that. This is not about public versus private schools. It's about finding the best scenario for every child, for every family, for every situation, for every need, talent, handicap, and skill set. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time to Senator Wayne, who will now, no, you don't want your time. You don't want my time. Okay, then I'll fill in a few more blanks. I thought you had something compelling that you had left to share. I did want to share that I have appreciated Senator Wayne's and Senator McKinney's comments in recent weeks about what we can and should be doing for prison populations. And it occurs to me that the two greatest things that we can do to impact prison populations in a positive way is before the crime is committed. And those two things are positively impacting home life and education. Home life is difficult for this body to impact to a great degree, but I think this legislature has done a great job of funding different programs and ensuring that we do everything that we can to create a good home life, particularly for kids that are in challenging situations. But we can do a lot to impact education, and this bill can and will do that. I don't know how we can look in the mirror and stand in the way of any child reaching their maximum potential. I don't want to stand in the way of families and kids in the 100% poverty level, which again is the first level of recipients of the scholarship. Don't stand in the way of families who qualify for free or reduced lunch program, the second tier of the scholarship. And certainly don't stand in the way of deployed military families who are the third level of recipients of these scholarships. Those who have made extreme financial sacrifices and, let's not forget, have offered their lives for the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of each one of us. Those kids should have every benefit offered to them, and if they receive a scholarship for school choice, it's still not enough to show our gratitude to them and their families. With that, I yield the remainder of my time to the chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Linehan has guests in the north balcony, 36 fourth graders from St. John's School in Lincoln, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Dover, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I won't repeat what others have said. They've all done a great job. I will just talk about my personal experiences. We were told that with time and money, public schools will get better. In 1977, I had some friends from North Omaha. Well, 46 years later, the schools are in worse shape. What are we to do? Wait another half of a century for schools in North Omaha to get better? Recently, I was talking to a kid who works at the Marriott, driving a van on the weekends. We talked, and he said he was attending Creighton University. He was an impressive kid. I asked him where he's from. He said North Omaha. I asked him where he went to school. He said he went to a Catholic school, told me the name, I can't remember it, as his mom could afford to send him. I asked him about his neighborhood friends, what was their story? His face froze. He looked down and he told me, my friends will never have the life I have. Their moms couldn't afford to send them to Catholic school. We need to give these kids a chance to live up to their full potential. Please vote green on LB 753, and I yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Linehan, that's 3 minutes, 25 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're coming up pretty close to cloture. I believe it's at 11:19. So when I was up before, one of the people I forgot to thank, and I owe him a great deal, is Speaker Arch. Speaker Arch, I think when he gets done with this session, which is his first session as Speaker and not a normal session in any stretch of the imagination, he will probably be able to write a very short, often stressful, but sometimes very humorous book about his experiences as his first year as Speaker. And I won't always be the superstar in that book because he's had my moments, my irritation and my stress, but he's always remained calm. So I really appreciate it. I wondered, is Senator Armendariz, I did not give her a heads up, but if Senator Armendariz would yield to a question, it's easy.
Senator Armendariz, would you yield to a question?
Yes. Senator Armendariz, I think you were up earlier and you were a little short on time, but you were talking about how this bill might have affected you. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so I was one of those students, grew up in a low socioeconomic environment in North Omaha, actually in Senator McKinney's district, one of the poorest zip codes in the entire state. We did not have a choice of what school to go to. And I know I spoke on the mic before. This was during busing, when busing was implemented. So I had even less restriction. Since I was in North Omaha and I was kind of a minority in North Omaha, they took the assumption that we need to keep the white people in North Omaha. So I had even more of a limited choice. I had really good friends who were minorities that got way broader choice of schools than I did because they were trying to expose them to different high schools. I only had the choice of an inner city school in my neighborhood. So this might have given me another option for a private school. We didn't have the means to have that option.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. I appreciate that very much. And I know I've talked to you all since you were running for the legislature, and your heart's all in on this, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Lowe, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I am also not going to trash our public schools. I went to Kearney Public Schools. We had a great education. Kearney does a good job with their education. And I'm proud of the job that they did. Don't fault them the way I turned out. Some of this might be a personal choice of mine. My father, though, would not have sent me to a parochial school because in his mind, we had already paid for public school. And why should we have to pay twice? That's not an option with some of those people from the lower socioeconomic ladder. They don't have a choice. My father had a choice. He chose not to. Because I came from Kearney and we had a great public school system, doesn't mean that all public schools are equal. The same as none of us are equal. And yet we have a choice. We need to allow our children and our families to have that same choice. We need our children to have the best education that they can get, no matter where that is. I want Nebraska to be at the top of the education charts. We have the teachers, we have the schools, we have the children. We need to make that so. With that, I yield the rest of my time to Senator Merman. I yield my time to Senator Merman.
Senator Merman, you have 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Thank you very much, Senator Lowe. Appreciate that. I was kind of slow getting into the queue, and I wanted to at least make a few comments as education chair. I've worked with Senator Linehan since I've been in the legislature on this school choice bill, and glad that we were able to advance it out of the Education Committee. And our hope is this year we'll have, and I think it's very likely we'll have more success on the floor this year. It's been mentioned that so many counties in the state, over 50%, don't have a public school in the county. The district I represent is very limited on a number of public schools in the district. However, it's also been mentioned that in greater Nebraska, especially the western 2/3 or so of the state, it's not uncommon at all to cross county borders to attend schools. So there are several private schools close to the district in surrounding counties, very close. And actually, just in the last 2 years, there's 2 schools, one in the district and one just outside the district, actually K-12 schools that are starting up, private schools that are starting up. So I do appreciate what public schools do for the education in our state. I do agree that we have very good public schools in the state of Nebraska, especially compared to the rest of the nation. Sometimes the barriers that are sent our way from the federal level to our schools are not helpful. And because of the family situations, we do want to support families. I do think families have the ultimate decision as to the best way that their kids are educated. Sometimes it's because, for lack of control in the classroom in a certain school, or just the teachings or moral guidance in that school aren't conducive to what the family desires. So I appreciate having another choice, especially those families that are of limited means, for another school to go. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I rise again in opposition to LB 753, and I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. But I just wanted to rise and make a couple of more points before we get to a vote here on cloture. So Senator Merman was just speaking about some of the reasons that he believes that we should be moving away from public schools or allowing for opportunities to get out of public schools. And he was talking about needing more moral guidance, or the teachings that are in public schools that people may not agree with. If families disagree with what's being taught in public schools, I think they're more than welcome to go to schools that maybe better fit their particular beliefs and their particular belief systems. And if a family wants to ensure that their students, or their kids rather, are being raised with some sort of religious upbringing in their education, I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's a perfectly valid position to have. And we have institutions in Nebraska that are sprinkled throughout the state that allow people to go to those kind of educational institutions and learn those things. What I don't think is appropriate, however, is the utilization of public dollars for that kind of education. And I know this is a fundamental disagreement between people who are voting for these kind of structures and those who are opposed to them. But it is my genuine belief that what we are doing with LB 753 is we are appropriating state dollars to private institutions. And people say, well, how could that possibly be? How could we be appropriating something if what we're talking about is a tax credit? Well, first of all, I want to be clear that this is a dollar for dollar tax credit. So these are tax credits being given up to a certain amount that people can be reimbursed for completely. And the fact that it is a direct tax credit effectively means that that is revenue that is foregone for the purposes of the state to utilize for the general fund. The Supreme Court has defined an appropriation essentially as an amount of money that is set aside for a specific purpose. We've been spending the last week and a half talking about this budget, talking about our green sheets. And what we know is that in the budget, there is $25 million that is specifically set aside for the purposes of the 753 tax credit fund. What that means is that's $25 million. Ultimately, it's going to grow to more, but that's $25 million that cannot be touched for other purposes. So that is a specific amount of money that is being set aside for a specific purpose and allocated for that specific purpose. It is revenue that otherwise we would be receiving and putting in the general fund. And so I do believe under a strict reading, even a plain reading of the definition of an appropriation, this $25 million that ultimately will balloon to $100 million is an appropriation. So the next question is it going to a private institution or is it going to a student? And we keep hearing this is for the kids, this is for the kids. Well, what we know is that this money is being allocated to a specific institution through the scholarship granting organization. It's not like we're giving every student who wants to go to a private school $10,000, put it in their backpack, and they get to walk around and spend it at whatever school they want. This money that they're getting is to go to a specific institution. Now, granted, it's not specifying which institution they can and can't go to, but the fact that they can only use it to a specific institution that they're being given a scholarship to means that that money is through this sort of funnel going to a specific institution from the scholarship granting organization as opposed to a particular student's backpack or pocket or whatever analogy you want to use. So given the fact that we have this appropriation of now $25 million, ultimately up to $100 million per year, that is going to private institutions, we're finding ourselves in a situation where I do believe we're running afoul of the constitutional provision that says we're not allowed to give public funds to private schools. That is one of my fundamental concerns about this legislation. And in addition to that, colleagues, I do have concerns that if we pass this legislation, we're going to find ourselves in a situation down the road through an amalgamation of issues that we're going to run into, thank you, Mr. President, with a lack of revenue, where we're going to be facing down the barrel of cutting services. And we saw what happened in Kansas. We saw what happened when services had to be cut. Schools are on the chopping block. And when we can't pay our teachers, when we can't provide high quality education, it makes our state worse. As I started this whole day off saying our schools are what make Nebraska what it is. People who left here moved back with their families to raise their kids because our schools are so good. And so I don't believe we should be doing anything that could undermine that. And I do have genuine and legitimate concerns that LB 753 is going to put us in a worse position down the road. I appreciate everybody's work on this. I appreciate the debate we've had today, but I would encourage my colleagues to vote no on LB 753. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Linehan would move to invoke cloture on LB 753 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Linehan, for what purpose do you rise?
Call the House, roll call vote in reverse order.
We're on final reading. Senators, please return to your seats. Members, the question is the motion to invoke cloture. Roll call vote. Reverse order was the request. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Wishart. Voting no. Senator Wayne. Voting yes. Senator Walls. Not voting. Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes. Senator Vargas. Not voting. Senator Slama. Voting yes. Senator Sanders. Voting yes. Senator Reapy. Voting yes. Senator Raybold. Voting no. Senator Merman. Voting yes. Senator Mosier. Voting yes. Senator McKinney. Voting yes. Senator McDonald. Voting yes. Senator Lowe. Voting yes. Senator Lippincott. Voting yes. Senator Linehan. Voting yes. Senator Kauth. Voting yes. Senator Jacobson. Voting yes. Senator Ibaugh. Voting yes. Senator Hunt. Voting no. Senator Hughes. Voting yes. Senator Holcroft. Voting yes. Senator Hardin. Voting yes. Senator Hansen. Voting yes. Senator Holleran. Voting yes. Senator Frederickson. Voting no. Senator Erdman. Voting yes. Senator Dungan. Voting no. Senator Dover. Voting yes. Senator Dorn. Not voting. Senator Decay. Voting yes. Senator DeBoer. Voting no. Senator Day. Not voting. Senator Conrad. Voting no. Senator Clements. Voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting no. Senator Breezy. Voting yes. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Not voting. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Bostar. Voting no. Senator Boston. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Voting no. Senator Ballard. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz. Voting yes. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Albright. Voting yes. Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Vote is 33 ayes, 11 nays, Mr. President, to invoke cloture.
Cloture is invoked. Members, the next vote is the motion to recommit. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
7 ayes, 35 nays to recommit the bill, Mr. President.
The motion fails. The next vote is the vote to dispense with the reading at large. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, 2 nays, dispense with the at-large reading, Mr. President.
The at-large reading is dispensed with. Mr. Clerk, please read the title of the bill.
Gross Legislative Bill 753, introduced by Linehan, 39th, request Governor Aguilar, 35, Albright, 17, Armendariz, 18, 47, Geis, 25, Halloran, 33, Ben Hansen, 16, Hardin, 48, Holcroft, 36, Hughes, 24, Ibaugh, 44, Jacobson, 42, Cal, 31, Lippincott, 34, Lowe, 37, McDonald, 5, Kinney, 11, Mosier, 22, Merman, 38, Reed, 12, Sanders, 45, Slama, 1, Von Gillern, 4, Wayne, 13, Boston, 25, Bill for Natural England, 27, 17, 20, 22, deputy section, provide for tax credits, retirement provisions, provide an operative date, provide for severability and repeal of the original section.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been Record, Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Archer, Armendariz, Ballard, Boston, Bostelman, Brewer, Breezy, Clemens, Decay, Dover, Erdman, Hollern, Hanson, Harden, Holdcroft, Hughes, Ibach, Jacobson, Cowth, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, McKinney, Mosher, Merman, Reapy, Sanders, Slama, Von Giller, and Wayne. Voting no, Senators Blood, Bostar, Kavanaugh, Conrad, DeBoer, Dungan, Frederickson, Hunt, Raybold, Wishart. Not voting, Senators Brandt, Day, Doran, Vargas, and Walls. The vote is 33 ayes, 11 nays, 5 present, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 753 passes. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, some items quickly. New LRs from Senator McDonald, LR 261. Senator Erdman, LR 262. Senator Vargas, LR 263. Senator Vargas 264 and 265 as well. And LR 266 from Senator Brandt and 267 from Senator Decay, all of which will be laid over. Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, still on final reading, engrossed legislative bill 753A.
Members, please return to your seats for final reading. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 753. Mr. Clerk, for a motion.
Mr. President, Senator Wayne would move to recommit the bill to committee, legislative bill 753. No,
Senator.
Excuse me, my apologies. Senator Wayne would move to return to select file for a specific amendment, that being to strike the enacting clause.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is not about LB 753A. This is about the next bill. We have an amendment drafting, so if I can get to lunch, give me another hour to get the amendment down here. So, Senator Hanson, will you yield to a question?
Senator Hanson, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Can you explain to me your helmet law bill?
Oh, jeez. Yes. Okay. So thank you for that, Senator Wayne. So basically the helmet law bill that I introduced this year that I prioritize would alter our existing current helmet law to include those 21 years and above. I get my numbers right here. Not prepared for this. To have the option to wear a helmet when riding a motorcycle. There's other provisions in the bill that would require them to fulfill other things, such as having eye protection or a windshield to prevent anything happening with the eyes during riding. But this would, and then also they would be required to take a class, a motorcycle safety class. That is something that a lot of other states have not done. And so Nebraska is one of the last states, especially in the Midwest, to have a full helmet law. All the states around us have altered theirs to typically 19 years and younger, with typically no other provisions. So ours would be one of the most conservative versions of a helmet law in the country. And this would then allow those who ride a motorcycle to have the freedom to, or the option to wear a helmet or not. I personally would wear one. I would encourage everybody else to wear one. But this comes down to the liberty to be able to wear one based on your own personal preference. And when it comes to, and I never, again, like I mentioned before, Mr. President, can I get a gavel, please? I know, I've always wanted to say that. Just all right. This would also, when we talk about tourism in the state of Nebraska, something, again, I never like to encourage or talk about making a law or getting rid of a law based on the financial interest of what would happen. But I feel we would see a significant increase in tourism in the state of Nebraska. And anybody, especially out in Western Nebraska, knows motorcycle riders, especially in Western Nebraska, go around the state of Nebraska, especially during Sturgis times or even those cross-country riders. I can always elaborate more on this later, but I'll yield the rest of my time back to Senator Wayne.
Thank you. In that short pause, what we're going to do for LB 50 is working with the speaker is we're going to go ahead and vote on this so we don't have to burn a half hour and then go to another bill and then come back after lunch and deal with LB 50. So with that, I'll withdraw my return to select motion, Mr. President.
The motion is withdrawn. Members, please find your seat. Mr. Clerk, please read the bill.
Mr. President, engrossed legislative bill 753A, introduced by Linehan, 39, a bill for an act relating to appropriation funding indicating the provision of legislative bill 753, 100, legislature first session 23 to be enacted by the state of Nebraska, section 1, thereby provided 248, 43 from the general fund, 200, 24, 42 to the Department of Revenue, Department of 102 to carry out provision legislative bill first 2023, first news per minute, 7 for salaries for funds appropriated in section not exceed 30,400 for fiscal year 2023 for 31,950 for fiscal year 2024-25.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been complied with, the question is, shall LB 753A pass? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Arch, Armendariz, Ballard, Blood, Boston, Bostrom, Brewer, Breezy, John Kavanaugh, Clements, Conrad, DeBoer, Decay, Dover, Dungan, Erdman, Frederickson, Holleran, Hanson, Hardin, Holdcroft, Hughes, Ibaugh, Jacobson, Cowell, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, McKinney, Mosier, Merman, Reapy, Sanders, Slama, Vargas, Von Giller, and Walls, Wayne, Wisher. Voting no, Senators Hunt and Raybold. Not voting, Senators Bostar, Brandt, Michaela, Kavanaugh, Day, and Dorn. Votes 42 ayes, 2 nays, 5 present, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 753A passes. Mr. Speaker, for an announcement.
Mr. President, I would ask that you move to LB 191 and proceed from there on the agenda.
Members, we are still on final reading. Please find your seats.
Mr. President, final reading, legislative bill 191E. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, I have a note to withdraw MO 356.
It is withdrawn.
In that case, Mr. President, I have nothing further on the bill.
Members, the first vote is to dispense with the at-large reading. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, 3 nays, dispense with the at-large reading, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk, please read the title.
Mr. President, engrossed legislative bill 191, introduced by Holler and 33, a bill for not relating to labor amendment, sections 48, 144, 48, 164, 164, 179, 62, 202, 169, 65, 65, 21, 103, 21, 07, 50, 6, statute discipline, 48, 101, 171, 71, 74, 71, 224, 78, 812223, revised statute, human something adopt the crew universe project for mental health and original workers' compensation related to grant funds, health insurance, covenant notice use, training, support, cash fund, and provision of the security, no determination for definition fees under the contract, requirements relating to distribution, like journal change, provision of rural workers, grants, harmonized provision for severability, declared emergency.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been complied with, the question is, shall LB 191 pass with the emergency clause? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Arch, Armendariz, Ballard, Blood, Boston, Bostar, Bostman, Brandt, Brewer, Breezy, John Kavanaugh, Clements, Conrad, Day, DeBoer, Decay, Doran, Dover, Dungan, Erdman, Frederickson, Holleran, Hanson, Hardin, Holcroft, Hughes, Ibach, Jacobson, Calf, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, McKinney, Mosier, Merman, Raybold, Reapy, Sanders, Slama, Vargas, Von Giller, and Walls, Wishart. Voting no, none, not voting, Senators Michaela, Kavanaugh, Hunt, and Wayne. Vote is 46 ayes, no nays, 3 present, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 191 passes with the emergency clause. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 753A. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 191 with the emergency clause. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, final reading Legislative Bill 254E. First of all, I've got a motion from Senator Michaela Kavanaugh that she wishes to withdraw MO 412.
It is withdrawn.
In that case, Mr. President, I have nothing further on the bill.
Members, the first vote is to dispense with the at-large reading. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
43 ayes, 4 nays, dispense with the at-large reading, Mr. President.
The at-large reading is dispensed with. Mr. Clerk, please read the title.
Gross Legislative Bill 254, introduced by Brewer, Lippincott, Conrad, Hardin, Hunt, Aguilar, Frederickson, Von Giller, Clements, Merriman, Wohlgraf, John Kavanaugh, bill for enacting the legislature, amendment section 5404, 5402, 521202, 3012, 1336, revised section 5702, article keeping the lumber executive board of the Legislative Council. Bill maintain publicly accessible during the arc video and the prescribed harmonized provision relating to the medical healthcare expense change provision relating to the net set of tax conduct, the office of the legislative audit, redefine term change provision in the Nebraska Education, change provision in the Nebraska Education Telecommunications Commission, harmonized provision provide duty for the revisor statute, repeal the original section, and declare an emergency.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been complied with, the question is, shall LB 254 pass with the emergency clause? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Arch, Armendariz, Ballard, Blood, Boston, Bostar, Bosman, Brandt, Brewer, Breezy, John Kavanaugh, Kayla Kavanaugh, Clements, Conrad, Day, DeBoer, Decay, Dorn, Dover, Duncan, Erdman, Frederickson, Holleran, Hanson, Hardin, Holcroft, Hughes, Ibach, Jacobson, Cowth, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, McKinney, Moser, Merman, Raybold, Reapy, Sanders, Slama, Vargas, Von Gillern, Walls, Wayne, Wishart. Not voting none. Excuse me, voting no, none. Not voting Senators Hunt. The vote is 48 ayes, no nays, one present, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 254 passes with the emergency clause. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, gross legislative bill 254A, introduced by Brewer, 43. It's bill for act relating appropriations, appropriate funds, and the carrying out the provision of legislative bill 254-100 legislation declaring emergency bill for the state of Nebraska. Here, section 1, the appropriate from the general fund, fit in the general fund, fiscal that can consolidate the provision of legislative bill 2 with section 20. No expenditure for the permanent establishment per diem expenditure section total the issue about from the 23, 24 to 0 from the 24, 25 to legislative accounts for 23. Provision legislative bill 2 education. There's new appropriate 257,000 to general fund 20 issues 24 45,000 to general fund 20. Nebraska educational communication purpose of aid and care of provision legislative 254 108 203 no extension permanent per diem state appropriation of this section 4 since emergency exists. This act takes effect when passed and approved according to law.
All provisions of law relative to procedure having been complied with, the question is, shall LB 254A pass? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, please record.
Voting aye, Senators Aguilar, Albright, Arch, Armendariz, Ballard, Blood, Boston, Bostar, Bosman, Brandt, Brewer, Breezy, Kavanaugh, Clements, Conrad, Day, DeBoer, Decay, Dorn, Dover, Duncan, Erdman, Frederickson, Holleran, Hanson, Hardin, Holcroft, Hughes, Ibach, Jacobson, Cowth, Linehan, Lippincott, Lowe, McDonald, McKinney, Mosier, Merman, Raybold, Reapy, Sanders, Slama, Vargas, Von Gillern, Walls, Wayne, Wishart. Voting no, none, not voting Senator Hunt. The vote is 48 ayes, no nays, one present, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 254A passes with the emergency clause.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 298, final reading. Senator Hunt, I have MO 479 to recommit with a note that she will withdraw that.
It is withdrawn.
In that case, Mr. President, Senator Blood moved to return Legislative Bill 298 to select file for a specific amendment, that being AM 1691.
Senator Blood, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I'd first like to point out that I owe an extremely big thanks to Senator Linehan for allowing me to amend this into her bill on final reading. And she does that because she has a great love for our military families. So with that said, Amendment 1691, formerly LB 413, was heard in front of the Education Committee on January 30th. There is strong support in favor of this bill and no opposition. The fiscal note stated there would be no fiscal impact. The Council of State Governments continues to partner with the Department of Defense Military Families Office on interstate compacts in support of our military families. Needless to say, these compacts benefit all licensed professionals in each compact sector as well. Nebraska has successfully passed compacts for physical therapists, psychologists, nurses, occupational therapists, audiology and speech language pathology, EMS, and doctors, to name only a few. Not only did these compacts remove licensure hurdles, but many expanded telehealth options as well. Nebraska has become a leader working towards a military-friendly state that continues to remove hurdles to employment. CSG has worked with a multitude of organizations in education for this compact, as well as individuals, and this did include educational professionals from Nebraska. This bill amends Section 79-101, and when passed, adopts the Interstate Mobility Compact to facilitate the mobility of teachers across the member states. This bill, in tandem with the other member states, establishes a collective regulatory framework that expedites and enhances the ability of teachers to move across state lines and maintain their teachers' certificates. The compact is intended to achieve the following when member states all ratify the same intentions: It creates a streamlined pathway to licensure mobility for teachers. It supports the relocation of eligible military spouses. It facilitates and enhances the exchange of licensure, investigative, and disciplinary information between members. It enhances the power of state and district level education officials to hire qualified, competent teachers by removing the barriers to employing out-of-state teachers. It supports the retention of teachers in the profession by removing the barriers of relicensure in a new state, and allows states to maintain state sovereignty in the regulation of the teaching profession. The compact will not go into effect until the date on which a 10th member state has enacted the compact into their laws. Withdrawing from the compact can occur 6 months after the enactment of the repealing of the statute, should we change our mind in the future. As many of you know, military families frequently move every 2 to 3 years. This is especially burdensome for spouses whose careers involve some sort of licensing. The process can be long and costly and stressful. This is especially true when you consider that part of moving is a new home, new schools, new healthcare providers, learning your way around a community, and more. We need to continue to make it easier for these trained and educated workers to hit the ground running. Reciprocity seems like the best solution, but it does not help these individuals when they are moving from state to state with different rules. Reciprocity between states can be messy with highly uneven standards. With compacts, background checks are done based on compact states, so Nebraska will not have to pay for background checks when a teacher transfers to our state. And unlike reciprocity, there's little paperwork involved because proof of certifications or degrees is not needed, as the information is already in the shared database. With interstate compacts, they can move between member states with ease. For the past decade, military spouses have experienced an unwavering unemployment rate of 22%, making it one of the highest unemployment demographics in the United States. According to new research, their spouses' military service is also negatively affecting their ability to maximize employer-sponsored retirement benefits, build their long-term financial futures, and find careers that offer competitive salaries equivalent to their professional experiences and/or education levels. Teachers within this compact will not have to go through the arduous process of obtaining a new license if they move to a compact member state. The compacts allow teachers a wider choice of districts and schools that fit their career and experience level, and thus allow schools a wider pool of talent to hire for their students. To be eligible, they need only to hold a license in a compact member state to be granted an equivalent license in another compact member state. A teacher with a valid unencumbered license is eligible to use the compact if they hold a bachelor's degree, have completed all requirements of a state-approved program for a teacher's license, and willing to undergo an initial criminal background check in the receiving state in accordance with the laws and regulations of the receiving state. Regulators within the ITMC also are unburdened with extra work of reexaminations and creating new licenses within the compact. Member states share data and profiles on teachers that can make qualification determination much easier. Also, public safety has benefited in granting licenses and vetting teachers for criminal or wrongdoing between member states of the compact through this shared data. Teachers moving to Nebraska also can be fast-tracked into classrooms, not having to go through a process of obtaining a new license or examination, and can make an impact on students immediately. Just being a member of the compact can allow Nebraska to collaborate and coordinate with other member states on discipline and licensing requirements, which can only improve in Nebraska with shared knowledge. Interstate compacts continue to prove themselves beneficial across the United States, especially for our military families, which is why licensed professionals continue to work with CSG on these compacts to benefit their members and expand the ease of licensure in a variety of careers. So with that, friends, I ask you for your consideration and to vote green to return this to select file so it can come back to final reading and we can support not only the amendment for our military families, but the underlying bill. And again, thank you again, Senator Linehan. I am sincerely appreciative.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator McKinney announces 23 seventh graders from Holy Name, Omaha in the north balcony. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Albright, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just rise because I want to let you know that there was an opposition to placing this on LB 298, and that was me. I personally feel like when a senator goes around and lets everybody know that it came out 8-0 and hadn't even been voted out of committee, that to me is a quick red flag. I believe this bill, while I support the military and I'd love for everybody to come into our state and be vetted early and everything passes through, there's a lot of information in 1691, 22 pages that I think everybody should take a quick look at, because this is something that could certainly come back next year. But I know on the last few days of the session, everybody's trying to put things in bills and hope, that they can get it across the finish line. I don't feel like it's a competition. If I have enough votes, I'm going to be able to get it anyway. And you're all perfectly capable of checking through this and looking it over. But I personally feel like when we go into a compact with other states, and this is just something new because we are having trouble with teachers, but truly, I think this is something that Nebraska, we need to just take a step back. I don't know what the fiscal note is on this. I'm concerned whether this is something that we need to be doing right now. I think it's something that could certainly be laid over till next year. But I do not appreciate telling one story and the other story is that we had to go under the balcony to vote on this just because it was something that somebody wanted at the last minute. And for that, I think we should caution ourselves in voting for this. And thank you. And I'll yield the rest of my time to the president. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blood announces some guests in the under the south balcony. Well, they're in the north balcony. 48 fourth graders from Chandler View Elementary and also under the south balcony. Please be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any confusion on this issue is on me, not anybody else, on me. I talked to Senator Blood, and I didn't have a problem with this, and I should have told others, especially people on the Education Committee, so that's on me. Senator Blood said something that I do want to confirm. I do love military families. I have one. I have my very own military family. My son is a Marine. Now he's in the National Guard. So when he was in the Marines, 12 years, I think, his wife had 3 children. I think they're maybe 16 months apart. Well, 2 of them are twins, so they were little. He was deployed, I think, 3 times, 7 or 8 months. When she was delivering the twins, he was actually like 5 states away and had to anyway, she's gone through a lot. And then they moved back home and he got a job with the National Guard, which he loves, but then he moved to Grand Island and now they're facing some other kind of disruption. I don't think unless you're actually in a military family, you have any idea what sacrifices they pay. So we have a situation in Nebraska where you're teacher, nurse, whatever, you come to Nebraska, you're following, whether you're a man or a woman, you're following your spouse all over the country, sometimes around the world, and we make it hard for you to teach. I think it's silly, especially when we're short of teachers. And yes, I think we should do everything we can to help our military families. And not just because we have OFFA or STRATCOM, but because, plus I worked with a lot of military families. When I was in Iraq, I worked with military. I watched guys call home, talk to their wives and kids who they hadn't seen for 6 or 7 months. And some of them were on their 3rd or 4th tour. So again, on me for not letting everybody know, that is on me, and I'm sorry. But I told Senator Blood this would be okay. So we're not voting on it today, I don't think. We're just sending it back to select file, right? I don't know what the agenda is. Don't think we can yield and ask the question to, anyway, I'm getting a head nod, so I think I'm right. So I'm for sending it back to select file. Thank you very much.
Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to make this brief, but I would ask that Senator Merman yield to a question.
Senator Merman, would you yield to a question?
Certainly.
Senator Merman, I want to paint a picture on how long I've been working on this bill since its initial hearing in January 30th. How many times would you say that I came up to you and talked about interstate compacts and the importance of this bill after that hearing? And this isn't a gotcha question. I just want to put things in perspective. Would you say more than 5?
I don't think more than 5, but you did
But at
talk
least
to me
5.
2 or 3 times for sure.
Like lots of times. And was it to explain to you the importance of our military families and why interstate compacts are important, and how in the past we've passed all of our compacts with ease? Would you say that that was a correct interpretation of our conversations?
Yes, that's correct, and I actually do support the bill. I would have liked to gotten it in our package 705, but we're limited as the number of bills we could put in there, so.
And I appreciate
that's
that.
the total reason it didn't get in there.
Thank you, Senator Merman. I just want to make sure that we define that this was not a last minute thing. This is a thing that I worked on for months and months and months. And when I was asked if I had the support of the committee, I never said I had 8-0. I said I had member support, and then it was decided that we would vote it out to make the ease of process, as opposed to just doing an amendment that hadn't been voted out. So Senator Linehan could put it into her bill. So I have not been deceptive. There are many of you on the floor that I've talked to about this bill. I went around and did a vote card. We had well over 30 votes, and I hope that you stick with me. And I just would really like to see us pass at least one of the 3 compacts we brought forward this year for our military families, especially with the teacher shortage. Don't do it for me, do it for our military families. And help us return this to select file so we can bring it back to final reading and help a lot of people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 254A. With the emergency clause. See no one else. See no one else in the queue. Senator Blood, you're recognized to close and waive closing. Members, the question is the motion to return to select file. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, please record.
48 2 nays, return to select file, Mr. President.
The motion is successful. Senator Blood, you're recognized to open on your amendment.
Friends, please push green. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question before the body is the adoption of AM 1691. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
37 ayes, 2 nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
The amendment is adopted. Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 298 be re-advanced to ENR for re-engrossing.
Members, you have heard the motion to advance for ENR engrossing LB 298. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed nay. It is advanced.
Mr. Clerk for items. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, new LRs, LR 268 from Senator Albright and LR 269 also from Senator Albright. Both will be laid over. Notice that the Revenue Committee will be holding an executive session at 1:15 under the south balcony today. Revenue Committee 1:15 under the south balcony. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Sanders moved to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor, vote aye or stay aye. All those opposed, say nay. We are in recess.